Hey guys, Dave from Mozaik back with another behind the scenes view of version 14. In this video, we're going to take a look at the material libraries. So the material library changes in version 14 are really aimed at helping you manage the materials and organizing them in a more structured way, but also allowing you to manage the relationship between textures and materials in a much more effective manner. So let's get in and take a look at some of the changes. As you'll see, the screen looks a little bit different. We've now got this sort of sidebar menu over on the side here, broken down into material properties and graphic properties. All the information that you were previously used to is still available in the columns, but we think this sidebar menu is a much more digestible way to interpret that information, and just a real quick snapshot as you click on each material as to what that material properties option is set to. Now, taking a look at one thing before I run through that in more detail, you'll see that I have this sort of category. We're calling this a header menu, and you can create your own header menus down in the bottom here, material headers, and you can go ahead and minimize and expand those. So I've created one called default materials, and I've moved that to the very top of my list here. That way I can collapse the entire list. And then I've created a new one called Polytech and Egger. I'm going to expand open my Polytech range. At the moment, I've just got a couple of materials in there as an example. This is a work in progress. But the concept is that you're able to create your own headers and organize and structure your content in any way that makes sense for your workflow. Now, with the Polytech material, let's click on one of these and we'll go through and explain kind of what some of the different options in the sidebar menu are. So when you can see we've got material properties, we've got the ability to define a material name versus a report name. So what's the difference? Well, the name itself is what will appear in the drop-down menus in Mozaik. So as you drop in a menu down and select in a material in the job settings, that's the name you're going to see. And that, as you'll see in the previous video that I did, you'll have the material selection and then the texture selection right next to it. So that's where that comes into play. And now coming to the report name, well, the report name really is a combination of what the name is going to show when you get to the cutting list, the optimizer, and the printouts. Everywhere else where you kind of see that name once it goes through the rest of the workflow. And so what I'm doing here is dynamically calling up the texture name. So that way, once you've selected the texture at the job level, then the report name will reflect that. And that way, that's what's going to see in your cutting list. You're going to see that on your labels and everywhere else across the board in Mozaik. So really easy to set up and achieve. You can also call up the texture abbreviation as well by just putting the texture abbreviation in the brackets there as well. So very easy to distinguish the difference between the two now. And then coming down, we've got a whole new area to define the graphic properties. So what you can see there is the first thing you can define is what group of textures you're pulling or assigning the materials to. So you can see here that I've just got a couple of options in here just to give you a bit of an idea. Now, the texture group is relating to this new button that you'll see at the top called texture groups. And that's where you can define the different groups of textures. So what I'll do is I'll start there and then I'll circle back to the graphic properties in a moment. So when you go into the texture groups, it's broken down by cabinets and countertops to align with the workflow that already makes sense based on the way Mozaik has always worked previously. And then you'll have texture groups. So this is where you're able to create your own groups. Inside here, I've just created a group called my 16mm collection from Polytech. Now, these particular ones are just a work in progress, but you can see that you can go ahead and create duplicate textures. So I can have the same image appear 3 times and then have the different finish assigned to it. So for this particular material from Polytech, it comes in a matte, a vignette, and a smooth finish. Now, from a rendering perspective, I would want to control to make sure that I can assign a flat sheen or a satin sheen or, perhaps a semi-gloss or a high gloss sheen. So that way, when we're looking at this in both the 3D representation and then go into a rendering engine, you'll then have the correct level of sheen assigned. So that way the material knows how to react to light. So that's a big reason for creating this texture group. But there's so many more sort of benefits that flow on from that as well. You're also able to define whether the material has grain and whether the material kind of grain is a standard grain or it's a cross grain. So if you're ordering that sheet as a cross sheet in particular for the grain, or you're just ordering it as a standard vertical kind of along the length grain. Coming across, then you've got the ability to assign a cost. Now this is really important because you can assign the cost back here on the material as well. And you can choose how you want this to work. You could make this a duplicate cost, meaning that you could assign the cost to the material and assign a cost to the texture and have Mozaik add the two costs together to give you a new price. So think of like, you might be ordering a stock material and then applying a stain finish to that. So you might have a cost assigned to the stain, but then also a cost assigned to the stock material as well. Same thing applies to pre-finished materials. In a pre-finished material situation like this, you probably just want to assign the cost to the actual texture, because the cost of this material will be different depending on whether you're ordering it in the matte, vignette, or smooth. So I would go through and assign my cost here. And then down the bottom here, I can say I want to price by my material or price by my finish. And if I've assigned that to price by finish, this price that I've assigned here will come into play. Now you've also got the ability to create different abbreviations for each one of these textures. And then the last thing I'll kind of explain here is that when you go ahead and add a new texture, you'll see it opens up the standard textures wood location for where you're pulling these images from. And then you can actually create subfolders now. So you can have a subfolder and organize your textures into categories that make it easier to update over time. So I've just created a Polytech subfolder here and a 16mm collection with some images inside there to give you a bit of an idea. You could also break them down into perhaps like patterns, wood grains, and solids, or however you see fit. We'll be supplying some updated texture groups to make this a lot easier for you to set up, but just to give you a bit of an idea of how you can leverage this as well. So coming down from there, so let's say now we've got our texture group set up and defined and we're happy with how that works. Then what you'd do is you'd go to your material and you'd nominate that texture group. So you can say, look, I want this particular material to always get its texture selections from the Polytech 60mm collection. The idea of this is that then all the other textures in all the other areas or groups are not sort of visible for this particular material. It's allowing you to create categories that make sense. So when you're selecting them in a job level, you're only seeing the ones that are relevant to that particular material. Taking away the noise and taking away, the infinite amount of choices and textures that you'd have to scroll through or search through to find the right fit. So what you'll see on the screen here is I've got 4 materials from Egger. I've got a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 5/8, and 3/4. I've also got 5 different texture finishes. Now, what we've seen in the resulted materials is that I've got 20 materials that have been generated from only 4 core materials and 5 textures. So we're getting like a compounding effect of having a small collection of materials with a collection of textures and then a resulting material compounds, meaning that you only need to manage a smaller group of materials in Mozaik. We can see this is where the real benefit is going to lie in this feature. So then coming down from there, you've got the ability to say whether the material is two-sided. So if it's two-sided, then you'll just assign one face texture. And I could say, look, I want to pick this particular texture as my default selection. If it's not two-sided, then you could assign a different appearance for the back. So perhaps it's it's got a raw texture on the back, or perhaps it's like a downgraded veneer appearance on the back. Whatever it is, you can assign that if you uncheck the two-sided option. And then you've got the ability to display the edge. So if you'd like to display the edge, go ahead and display maybe like an MDF core as the edge of that material. So you can go ahead and control those items. That's what's going to make it really easy to know if your part is edge banded in the right location, because you're seeing a raw edge assigned. So you could show that graphically correct, like a MDF or particle board or plywood substrate. Or you could perhaps, if you're not so much concerned about the rendering in 3D appearance, but more so concerned about just catching a mistake, you might make that a really obvious color, like a bright red or a bright green, to really highlight that edge. You'll catch it when you see the job visually. So there's creative ways you can use that for sure. And then coming down, we've got the sort of standard sheet properties that you would already know, and you can price by sheet and area. So very similar kind of controls to what we had previously, but really the updated control around the graphic appearance there for sure. Now, taking all that into consideration, as you can see, there's going to be a lot better ways to both store and control your data, but also making it easier to control the relationship between textures and materials. And I think when you see this play out in the whole picture, this will make a lot more sense. Compare this to the first video that I released a couple of weeks ago on the way you select materials at the job level. This is more of a behind the scenes snapshot at how you would manage materials now. So I would love to get some feedback on this for what you guys think. Definitely this is like a massive step forward for the way you can sort of manage materials, but still done in a very Mozaik, easy to use, easy to digest manner. So we hope that you enjoy this, and I look forward to releasing another version 14 sneak peek video really soon. Cheers.